17th, 2023, and this is a regular meeting of Moscow City Council. Welcome. Drew,
Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
please rise and join us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Drew. Next up on the agenda is the consent agenda, and these are items that are generally routine, non-controversial, housekeeping type of issues, and they can be pulled by any member of the council who would like to have it open for longer discussion.
Sir, I move approval of the consent agenda.
I second.
Moved and seconded. Sandra,
Aye.
Gina,
Aye.
Maureen,
Yes.
Drew,
Aye.
Julia,
Aye.
Haley.
Aye.
Okay, the consent agenda is approved. Next up is mayoral appointments, and I have one this evening, and that's for Sue Scott for the Planning and Zoning Commission, term to expire 12/31/2026.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we approve Sue Scott to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
I second and
second.
third and fourth that.
Okay, moved and seconded. Drew,
Aye.
Julia,
Aye.
Gina,
Aye.
Maureen,
Aye.
Haley,
Aye.
Sandra,
Aye.
moved and approved. Welcome to Planning and Zoning. Would you like to say a few words, Sue? I will add that. Oh,
2
take the
minutes.
whole night. No, when I first got on to planning and zoning back in 2003,
Oh, you're saying everything, so I don't have to.
there is our chairman at the time. So Sue was my introduction to city government pretty much. So please go right ahead.
So you're giving me credit for time served.
You bet.
So I spent 10 years on P&Z and 4 years on city council, and I see you got a lot better chairs after I left. But my city council just had too many meetings. You know, if you really want to do the job right, it's got too many meetings, and I really love P&Z is my first love, and just like to know about things before they happen instead of after it's already done. So I know most of the people on the commission, as I know most of you, and thanks for the vote of confidence. I haven't told you my secret, agenda yet. I lived in Moscow for 40 years and had a business downtown, and I'm semi-retired. I do all my volunteer activities. So,
Cool.
any
Cool.
questions?
Just excited
Why
to see your
bother to
name
do
there.
This again.
Just do better than the guy's spot you're taking.
So, well, congratulations and welcome back to city government, Sue.
Thanks.
Good to have you.
Looking forward to it. And this way, it's a volunteer. It doesn't mess with my, latte a month Percy retirement.
That's true.
Smart cookie.
I would add for everybody out there and everybody watching on TV that various of the city commissions do have vacancies. There's one vacancy on the Board of Adjustment. There's 2 available for fair and affordable housing, 1 available for human rights, 1 available for the Moscow Arts Commission, and 1 available on the Sustainable Environment Commission. So here's a chance to get involved and get going with city doings. Wait on in, volunteer. Next up is public comment and the mayor's response period. And so for 15 minutes in 3-minute chunks, please come up and tell us what's on your mind, as long as it's not currently pending before Planning and Zoning or the Board of Adjustment, nor on tonight's agenda. So any takers for public comment tonight?
Has nothing to do with planning and zoning.
So this time you get to
I know,
introduce yourself.
112 South Main, Sue Scott. A while ago, actually, a year ago, July, I lost my driver's license, my purse and everything. I found it 6 weeks later, but I needed my new driver's license. So I go over to DMV and I have to prove where I live. And our city water and sewer is in my husband's name. I own the building too. And so I asked Art, I said, Art, you need to put my name on the utility because the utility is a proof of where you live and that you live in the city. So I don't know if it's happened for other people because I'm sure there's a lot of billings that they don't know the joint tenant's name. So my request is that the city put out, say, in their, in their little letter with the water and sewer, please, joint tenants, ask to have your name put on the bill so you can prove where you live, so you can get your new driver's license.
That would be helpful.
That is,
Good point, Sue. Thanks. Other takers? Okay. Moving right along. Next up is the Citizen Commission report from the Historic Preservation Commission, Mike Ray and Nels Reese.
Evening, Your Honor, council members. I'm here to introduce Nels Reese. He's the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. Historic Preservation Commission's done a lot of great things this last year in 2022 and continues to do those. And I'm going to cut this short because I know how many slides Nels has on his presentation here. So I'll turn it over to the man.
Thanks, Mike.
Make it go forward. It's just that guy. Okay.
Welcome, Nels.
Well, imagine meeting you again, the Mayor Betke and council. Good to see you tonight. Good to start out the year this way. Mike said we did a lot of great things. I'm suspicious about that, but we have done some things. And as always, I'm going to try and take just a minute or two longer than you might expect, but just to do a little bit of a review of Historic Preservation Commission. I didn't write the whole, our mission is quite a lengthy thing. It's a little bit more than you'd really ever want to read, but this sentence basically states it: to protect and preserve the heritage of the city by preserving and regulating historic landmarks. Keep that in mind, regulating historic landmarks. That is definitely one thing we have not done. Nevertheless, properties and districts which reflect the elements of the city's cultural, social, economic, political, archaeological, and architectural history. And this all is part of that pride of place that we all share. I think that, do I need to point it at it? There you go. What I'd like to do is just introduce our commission. We have 9 places on the commission, and Art, we could, I think soon we're going to have an opening. There's somebody filling the slot that hasn't been coming, but we may have an opening as well.
Oh,
So
well, I
you-
amend my comments. There's an opening for Historic Preservation Commission as well.
And so we'd be happy to hear from someone. You can see that we have old and young on our commission. And we've been guided by Sandy this last year. And so we always appreciate the, I don't know who's coming. You're coming good. And so we appreciate the contact with, constant contact with the rest of the city, yes. The biggest thing that just happened, and for some reason I didn't watch it as carefully as I wanted to, but Tyler's staff has busily been putting up new signs in Fort Russell. Now you'll remember that Fort Russell was our first historic district done in 1980. And that's what, 42 years ago. And then in 2017, work that was about a 3-year project, we enhanced the district. And what you see here is the thing I'm particularly proud of at this moment is the new signage. So we've always had a hard time knowing where is historic, where is Fort Russell? Am I on it now? And you can see by the red line up there on the map that the first person they hired to put the district together, in my mind, was confused about what needed to be done. She was a bright and wonderful person, and she didn't live here in Moscow, but you can see that the district is a strange shape for sure. And of course, the district to the north and west is defined by a hill, so that's pretty natural. The district, this red line that goes along here, was for some reason defined as they wanted to make it entirely residential. And as we looked at it in around 2014, when we began to restudy it, we thought, that's just not right. A neighborhood should have housing, it should have schools, it should have whatever in it. And so that the early district didn't, those red dots are buildings that are by right on the National Register. And so those buildings were ignored. Strangely enough, McConnell Mansion was not included in the first historic district. It's hard to explain. So we think we've rectified that, and the district goes right along 3rd and goes to East City Park. And so what I'm very proud of is that we now have signage on every corner in the district. So you can look up and see, am I in the historic district? And you see a little, it's a little drawing on the edge of the sign that's one of the windows from the McConnell Mansion. And so I'm pleased. I couldn't be more happy to now have this. I would like something a little more exotic. I'd like some flags or something, but I haven't figured out how to afford that yet. One of the things that this just carries on with my conversation. What happened when we enlarged the district is that we included, none of these churches were in, and the library wasn't in, 1912 building wasn't in, and so those are all in the district now, and it makes the district a much more wholesome and viable creature. And then, of course, because you have to be 50 years old, in 1980, buildings done in 1930 were not included in the historic district. So as we added another 40 or 50 buildings to the district, most of them that we added are in the 30s. And so you can see an example of those houses. And what it does is actually makes the district, since what I like is to have fancy houses and common houses in the same district. It's nice to not have a district over here for just rich people. You'd like to have these, most of these houses that you see in the 30s are just normal, and we wouldn't have to be a great leader, often own a department store or anything like that to be able to afford them. And I think it's really important that we have common folks in the district, as well as, not that we have any rich people in Moscow, but there you have it. So anyway, just a little bit of background as we think about it. While we have not created guidelines and rules, and in our present environment, it's a little bit tricky to start telling people what they need to do with their house. But one of our members on our commission worked diligently and put this little document together. And this has been handed out to the real estate people. And this is just a small document encouraging people to pay attention to the way they paint their houses, the way they take care of their property, the way they as fitting into the district. And I think it's a delightful effort to kind of get the result that we want without telling people, you've got to paint your house this color brown. I'm not ready to go there myself. And so this, I think, did you make any copies? We'll get a copy out to you. I thought we would have it here, but Mike left me standing here. So you should probably take a look at it. We'd appreciate any comments you might have about it. But the thought is that people would look at this and be excited about enhancing their properties. Now, we don't have that many people on our commission that live in the district, in the historic district, but Cynthia King, who did this piece of work, she does live in the district herself, and she carefully thought about how she wanted her house to look and wanted to share that with other people. Just this year, we've been in a process, a several-year project to put up informational signs on our public buildings. And so the third one just went up this year in front of the library. So we have an informational sign in front of City Hall, as you know, in front of the 1912, and now in front of the library. And so we think that there's a value in giving people a little background on what these buildings might. It's easy to have not have a good memory is difficult. And these informational signs help in that regard. The next informational sign we wanted to do is on Friendship Square, and we're sort of waiting for George and Carly. I'd like to get their building kind of in a place where we could. I think we'd like to put a sign on their building, but they've been in flux here for a period of time. But if you look at this document, look at that middle picture there. How many of you can remember that's Friendship Square?
Look into the high school.
Hello? I can't, I was here in school, but Friendship Square had already been designated by the time. I don't seem to remember that street that way, and it goes straight to the high school. Look at that. It goes right to the front door of the high school, 4th Street. And so if you think about Friendship Square, you think of the kind of activity, and what we want to tell in an informational document is some of the things that happened. And think of it in 1960. I was here in school, 4 lanes of traffic going through downtown, 4 lanes. Logging trucks, boom, 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 and so things have improved since that time. So look for that. We hope in the next year, we hope to be able to tell you that sign is up. Now, the fun thing that we do each year is give an orchid to people that we think have done work in preserving and enhancing and making more beautiful our historic community. And so these are some of the rules that we follow. And this year we gave 5 of these awards. And we've given, in the last 20 years, we've given over 100 of these awards. And you can see that they've varied. And so one of the things that I want to be really clear about is you don't have to be in a historic district to get a Orchid Award. So half of these projects are in historic districts, downtown or Fort Russell, and the other half are located someplace else. So we don't, there's nothing that keeps you from getting an orchid. And I could go on and on. You can look these up online. If you go on our website, you can see the 20 years of awards that we've given. This year, we gave 5 awards. And one of them was in the historic district. And I'll just quickly run through them. But the Burns and Johnson couple owned this house on 6th, and it was falling in. The foundation was in serious trouble. And so they did what a good husbandry would require, as they went in and raised their house up and put a new foundation under it. And the old foundation is right here in this pile of stone. So we were delighted to see a young couple purchasing a building like that, and rather than torching it, making it possible that it's going to stay. This is the Brian and Morgan Points house. And this is a house that I don't know about you, but I never saw this house before in all my life in Moscow. This is a little lane over off of Almond Street that says no trespassing, basically. It's just a little tiny lane. But this is a house that belonged to the Franklin and Mary Mix years ago. And what you will see here is that this couple has made an addition onto the house and done it in a very sensitive way, added to the historic house. And it's just a beautiful addition.
And time check, you're 15 minutes in.
And you have important stuff to do.
Just thought I'd
So,
remind you.
I'll hurry as fast as I can. And so anyway, as you know, the Legion redid their building, and we thought that was worth. It's a great public use building. The church people, the Unitarians, made an addition. It's a beautiful addition by day and night, and we thought it was deserving of an award. The university continues to take care of its historic buildings. And this year we gave the award to this young lady, Danielle Weaver, an architect from Boise, who has been instrumental in in adding to bringing the building back to its historic life. Those fleur-de-lis, the little up on the top of the building, all came down back in the 70s, and they put those back up. They've enhanced the details of the lobby and the railings. And so rather than give it to the university in a kind of just an obscure way, we gave it to the architect who was responsible for doing this work. And so that segues me as to what next. Where do we think we might go? And we have districts in town, and we would like to think that we might find a way to work with the university to create a district on the campus. And this just indicates some of the historic buildings on the University of Idaho campus. And if you see those, the core of the campus is, of course, a Gothic campus. And you see these 15 doorways that would indicate that kind of sensibility. So we are working diligently with the university and city leadership to try to come up with a plan for, and so I hope next year I'll be able to give you a more concise direction that we're taking. This probably would be a 2 or 3 year project as we get working on it. So other kinds of things, Swedetown is a possibility for the historic efforts. There are lovely houses over in the Swedetown area that we haven't figured out exactly how to deify those. But certainly consider looking at that as well. So thank you very much. Sorry about going over time.
Oh, it's okay. Council, questions, please.
I'm glad to see Swedetown potentially on the map. One thing that like my pie in the sky dream is for us to not have to refer to subdivisions as like over off of Orchard or like over by the pool. Like I'm really excited about the idea of us engaging community to further neighborhood identities and not just Fort Russell, because Fort Russell was always like, I grew up in Moscow. I know how the historic significance of it, but like growing up on the far edge of town, the sense of identity, we were just the kids who lived over by the pool.
I did that
So-
hoity-toity part. And
I-
that's why I wanted to talk about the
The
smaller
inclusive.
houses in the district that
Build out the
I hear
the
where you're
identity.
going.
Yeah. So I'm excited to see that like a conversation over, like, we're not saying over by Lena. We're not just saying the other side of Hayes. So I'm excited to hear that that's on
You
the
can
radar.
get my email, or you can talk to us at, if you have some advice, go ahead and
Put it on
send
my
it.
calendar.
Okay, thank you very much.
'Cause it was fun to see someone so enthusiastic about the work that their commission does. It was really just refreshing. So thank you.
I've sat on 2 commissions for many years. I've been on this one maybe for 14 or so, and it's more fun than
Planning and zoning.
P and Z is, well, we make big decisions, but it's not as much fun, I can promise you. And so there is something, there's a great deal of, I think all our members enjoy the work that we do. It's
Thank you.
great to give out awards.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nels.
Sorry to take
Good
up
stuff.
so much time.
No
I
worries.
can't help myself.
Don't be sorry. Thank you.
Good
for coming.
report, Nels. Thank you.
I just wanted from that. Okay.
Next up, we have an appeal of daycare license for the Jubilee School Montessori. Cody Riddle presenting.
All kinds of gadgets. Thank you, Mayor, members of council. As noted, this is an appeal of an administrative denial of a childcare license for a facility proposed in a space at the back of the East Side Marketplace, generally, as you can see on the screen. From a code perspective, it's a fairly black and white issue or consideration for staff. In this case, the applicant is not proposing to provide the outdoor play area that is generally required for a childcare facility. The code, as you can see, requires a minimum of 100 square feet of outdoor play area adjacent to a childcare facility. So because that area is not being provided or proposed, the license was denied administratively back in late December. And as allowed by code, that decision has been appealed, which brings us to you this evening. As you can see, council does have a lot of discretion to direct issuance of the license. It's a little different than a land use matter where you're not looking for some sort of error. You're simply looking for a finding of good cause, and the applicant will speak to that this evening. So just briefly, again, with the latitude you have, it's best to hear from the applicant. There are a couple areas on or adjacent to the site that could be used. You have space at the back of the building that you can see here that's being used by an associated school now. Perhaps that could be modified and secured with fencing to provide the required open space. Similarly, there's a space out in front of the building that I believe is actually being used now by another child care provider. And interestingly enough, they actually received approval of a license through this very process on an appeal of an administrative denial. In this instance, the appeal or the waiver you're being asked to grant this evening would be required either way, or certainly for the space out front because the open space isn't directly adjacent to the child care location. So again, you do have a lot of discretion this evening. It's best to let the applicant address you. They can explain their programming and how they believe the play area is not necessary or needed in this situation. And then after hearing from them, again, you can either uphold the administrative denial or with a finding of good cause, direct staff or the clerk to issue the license. Again, as a reminder, this is a little different than a land use matter where you're looking for some sort of procedural error and something like that. You have full discretion. Just in closing, I would note that through this appeal process, I mentioned one, but there have been a few of these granted over the years. The example I cited in the East Side Marketplace was one. There's also, I believe, the Goodwill building. It's the storm cellar now, where there's no adjacent open space. And then finally, there was one out at the Creekside Apartments on South Main where they were granted a waiver through the appeal process. In that case, the play area wasn't immediately adjacent to the childcare facility. Not suggesting that necessarily or any of those instances justifies this one, just that there are examples where upon considering those, the nuances of those cases, the appeal was granted, but every circumstance is different. So with that, I conclude, and you could probably hear from the applicant.
Before we get to the applicant, does anybody have any direct questions for Cody?
I have one question for you, Cody. You have a list of those that have gotten approval. I wonder if any of them have had two providers using the same property.
Mayor,
Is there any?
Councilmember Laughlin, not that I'm aware.
Although I've been on that property before, is there any kind of play structure or anything else on that property? Just green grass and?
It's fenced a bit, and I believe there is a minimal amount of play equipment, perhaps. And again, I'm not suggesting that's the solution. It just there's space, in relative close proximity is the only reason I mentioned that.
Thank you.
I have a question. Cody, they don't actually use that a little parking island though, right? That belongs to another school.
That space is used by a separate childcare provider they were granted a waiver because the children have to cross the service drive for the shopping center there to get to the play area. The strict letter of the code indicates that play area needs to be immediately adjacent, so you're not crossing streets, parking lots, and things like that.
And I just have another question. I read in the packet on page 65 this letter from Malia Lynn Mason. And it also addresses other issues that I would think would be critical, and that is that they don't have a conditional use permit to have a school there, and that they also have issues with fire safety and the electrical panel.
Well, we might save some of those after the applicant speaks and use this as part of the council's discussion and
Okay.
deliberation.
I would just say very briefly, they've indicated they plan to comply with all of those requirements. And if they are granted a license through council this evening, they would be required to pursue that conditional use permit.
Thank you.
One last point of clarification. So are there, with Jubilee currently there are two other separate care facilities at the east side? Is that right? Or is it?
Mayor, Councilmember Lewis, I believe there's a school and another childcare facility. This would be a second childcare facility.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. At this time, let's hear from the applicant.
Thanks, Cody.
Come up and introduce yourself.
Good evening, I'm Malia Mason. Do I have to give my address? Okay, 313 South Cleveland Street. And I'm here on behalf of Jubilee Montessori. We are a part of the Jubilee School, but we expanded our building a little bit over the summer. And so we have a separate entrance now. So we're still actually part of that school, if that helps with your question a little bit. Anyway, we are asking for the city council to consider waiving the playground requirement. And the reason for that is that we are actually a school program. Montessori is designed for 3 to 6 year olds. It's a mixed age group environment. And we're trying to be an authentic Montessori program and include 3-year-olds all the way through 6-year-olds in our program. And the problem we're running into is Moscow doesn't recognize 3-year-olds as school age. And so that's why we're being required to get a daycare license if we want to include 3-year-olds. But we aren't actually a daycare. So the reason I state that is that the 3-year-olds are really only there for 3.5 hours in the morning, as well as the 4-year-olds the 3-year-olds would only be there for 3.5 hours with a little bit on either end for arrival and dismissal. And both they and the 4-year-olds leave at noon. And so we wouldn't, even if we had a playground built adjacent to our building, which is in the plans for the future as soon as we can get the funds for it. But even if we had those funds and even if we have that playground built, the 3 and 4-year-olds would not use it because we have an authentic Montessori program that includes a 3-hour work period in the morning. And so only the 5 and 6-year-olds who would stay till 3 p.m. would be using the playground. They would use it after lunch and they would have a recess time then. So we're asking you to consider that as good cause for letting us waive that requirement, because even if we were to have a playground, the 3-year-olds would not be utilizing it. They come in the morning for 3 hours and a little over 3 hours, and then they go home. And I can also answer any of those other questions you wanted me to answer as well.
Might be a good time to go back to you, Julia.
Is the school operating without a conditional use permit in that location?
We just found out that through this process that we would need one for the Montessori portion if we were getting licensed. So we have reached out to the people we need to get that. And it was decided that we should jump through this hoop first. And if we get past this hurdle, then we'll start the conditional use permit process. We also, as far as the fire safety issues that they found, we have already had someone come and give us a quote for the work that was recommended. And we're waiting, as soon as we get the quote, the mall has to approve it, and then those requirements are going to be met with regard to the fire concerns that they had.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Looking at I guess the true Montessori school and how this works, have you, while going through this process, do you know of other schools maybe in the region or area that have had a look at oh my gosh, we have to also do a daycare as well as a school, even though we're not really a daycare? Is there precedence for this from other places?
That's a good question around this area. I don't know. I know that I was a assistant director of a preschool in Massachusetts, and I did my Montessori training in Minnesota. And in both those places, it was well known that Montessori programs often needed variances for early childhood, for typical early childhood regulations, just because Montessori does some things a little differently. And they're usually given the variances because, like, for instance, things like glass in the classroom, that's a part of the Montessori curriculum, is teaching children to be careful with breakable things. Whereas if you're in a more standard childcare program where they aren't necessarily directly teaching about things like that, glass in the early childhood classroom isn't a good idea.
Sure.
So I would say I don't have immediate statistics for you.
I wasn't
in
looking at
Idaho.
statistics,
Yeah.
just wondering if you were able to look back on something and see how, as you said, kind of jump through those hoops, even though you're not a daycare, but you have to get
Right.
approval for
So
it.
I think that it is the case that Montessori schools often have to come and ask for variances or waivers for various early childhood regulations.
Thank you.
So I'm feeling a little torn. So I have a question.
Okay.
We went through a really big, robust, heavy lift to review our child care code. And I went to a Montessori school, so it's got a soft spot in my heart for sure. But what I'm hearing is if this portion of the program isn't daycare but is school, our definition of daycare, because we did cap it, we did say 5 to 21 is school age in the code review. Daycare in the city code is defined as care and supervision provided for compensation during part of a 24-hour day for a child or children not related by blood, marriage, or legal guardianship to the person or persons providing the care in a place other than the child or children's own home or homes. And so I hear that there is a distinction with Montessori, but like by this definition, I'm reading that it is
Yes.
by
so
city code, it
I
would
know,
fall under
like,
daycare.
the black and white of it is, as far as you're concerned, it's daycare. And so I recognize that. That's why we're trying to get a license. We're trying to follow your regulations. But we're just asking for the waiver of this specific requirement because of the fact that the 3-year-olds would not even use the playground if we were to have one.
Yeah, for sure. But I also I don't wrangle 3-year-olds for a living, so I don't know how hard it is to keep them from a playground if it's there. I guess.
Well, it would be fenced and off the classroom with a closed door. And I'll just say one other thing, because if people are concerned about the children getting enough activity, one of the beautiful things about the Montessori method is that children's control of movement is part of the philosophy and the principles and the way the whole program is set up. So the children are moving around the classroom all morning. It isn't like they're sitting in 3-year-olds sitting in chairs at a desk for 3.5 hours without a chance to move their bodies. They are actually moving around the classroom for the entire 3-hour work period.
So more than even the sorry, Mayor, one more follow-up if that's okay. So more than the conversation about the outdoor space requirement, what I'm hearing is the biggest distinction in this particular appeal is that our conversation has been around the logistics of being a daycare, when you're saying that fundamentally the program itself functions not like a daycare and should be treated like a school. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that even though by like textbook definition, 3-year-olds are at a daycare by city code?
That's
The
how
program
I
is-
see it.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's how I would. I
Okay.
think I would agree with that. But it's also just the very. It's also just the obvious fact that they wouldn't even use it. Like that's the big piece of it. Yeah.
So I have two questions, and
Yes.
one is the issues. Cody talked about two different places, the playground in the back and the playground up there in the front.
Yes.
Do you have a sense of which one of those you'd use?
Well, the playground that's in the front is actually the one that you've already given the permit to the other childcare facility, and that's an actual daycare. They very kindly have let us have permission to use that space if we wanted to. But since we are now sort of in the back of the building, it's a lot less convenient for us, and it still would only be used by the children who are 5 and 6, so it wouldn't fall under this jurisdiction anyway. But we do have access to that if we ever wanted to use outdoor space. That childcare facility has in the past allowed us to use it if we needed it for something special. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay.
I just don't think there's a distinction between other preschools and your preschool. I mean, your curriculum is one thing and Moscow Day School has a different curriculum. I think if you're taking care of kids who are pre-kindergarten, it's a daycare. And, you know, whether or not you provide education is, or your educational model is interesting, but it still needs to meet the requirements of taking care of young children. So I just think that part is kind of spurious. But I think she wanted to respond to that. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I guess I just wanted to say, I didn't mean to imply that other programs weren't taking care of children or that we weren't taking care of them. Just that our method is, our principles that we're operating on are a little bit different. But I didn't mean to come across it if you felt
No,
like it was negative in some way.
No, I wasn't either. I'm just saying that
Okay.
all of these places provide some education. So,
Oh, yeah.
so we can't really say like, well, this brand of education is special or different than that one, in my opinion. No.
Okay, no more questions. Thank you. Don't run off. Council gets to deliberate now. Go.
I disagreed with that, which I know probably isn't a surprise. I think that the Montessori program has a long history of their curriculum and what they do. And I do believe that they do act as a school and always have. And because we do have some leeway and we have precedents for leeway in how we're able to grant these things, I think that is the one area we can, because they do have a history that shows how they do things. It's been around for maybe not centuries, but possibly centuries. Thank you. And that part doesn't waver. And so it's one of the few times that I don't have any hesitation in saying I think that we can allow this to happen because you are fulfilling the needs. You do have the curriculum. You are teaching it that way. You've been trained that way. You've gone to school to teach it this way. I think if ever there is a time to be able to grant a little bit of a waiver, it's in this instance. So.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
This is actually a question for you, and that is,
Better hop back up.
are your teachers Montessori trained?
I am the lead teacher and I am Montessori trained, yes. And I have an assistant who I personally have been training. So she hasn't been through official training, but she is under me. So
And that would be your job over the 3 to 6-year-olds?
I'm the director of the Montessori program, yep. And I have an Association Montessori International credential through the Montessori Training Center in Minnesota.
Okay, back to deliberating.
I think we've spent a long time on creating the rules for childcare and that we should adhere to them.
Gina,
You know, I'll admit a moment of hearing both sides of this argument and being completely torn. I think that, I think we've got a strong demand for childcare, and we did work really hard on our guidelines and that sort of thing, but I too have grown up knowing about, I'm not 112 years old or however old you are, but, or old you said the school was, but I have heard of Montessori my entire life, and there is a real rigor there. So I guess if I'm leaning at all, it's towards allowing the variance, because I do believe there is a rigor and a structure here that's different than a regular daycare.
Can the kids stay past 3 o'clock, the noon hour?
The 3 and 4-year-olds, no. The only ones that stay are it's a 3-year program. And so the 3rd year is equivalent to a kindergarten year. And those are the only children who stay after lunch and afterwards. We don't provide before school care or after school care either.
Drew, we haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, no. So going into the conditional use permit, how would that work depending on how the decision would be made? I don't know if this is a counsel for Bill or for Cody. I'm not suggesting anything at the moment, but I'm just curious, depending on decision, what does that look like and what is needing to get that use?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Davis, that separate process reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission. They wouldn't be it would really take this question of outdoor play area out of the equation. That would have already, if you were to grant this, that standard or requirement through the licensing would be met. They would be evaluating, for parking, the loading area, things like that.
In addition to that, the issues that Julia raised, in fact, they could not move in there until those factors were taken into consideration.
That is correct.
I have a
Sure.
kind of a what if question. What if you guys don't stay at Montessori school? What happens then?
Good question.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Trucio, the license is reviewed or updated annually.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose so.
Okay.
We would be flagged or could evaluate it. If you grant the license, it's based on kind of the operating characteristics that were described, and I believe it runs with the specific provider. So is your question if that provider's leaves the site or somebody else wants to?
Well, I guess that's kind of a multi-level question. Could we, number one, say, as long as you are a Montessori school, this is your license? Or is that a condition we can't?
I think that becomes a condition that's difficult for us to interpret and to enforce. You appear, they tell us they are. Are we going to look at the curriculum to validate that statement? I think you need to view this as being a license for a daycare facility, and if you grant the appeal, you're essentially giving them a waiver from the outdoor play area.
Right.
And can't we make it a condition that the outdoor playground will be set up before they do that, and it's right outside the building?
Before they do what?
Before they start running a school?
They already are.
They already are.
No, not a school, but the 3 to 6 year
And
olds.
that's already in the
They already
code.
They're there.
So what you have here is getting leeway and exemption from having to have an immediately adjacent play area. And there is historical precedent for it. So,
But they're not using outdoor playground at this time.
And I believe if I interpreted it right, they won't be using it at all.
Right.
So if we had another person that wanted to start a daycare and they said, well, it's my philosophy not to let the children outside. So I'm not going to have a playground. Please give me a waiver. How would that be different? What would we say?
I think I would want to look at their curriculum and see why they're not doing it. Are you actually a school? Are you just a daycare? Are you watching after students? Or are you doing classes and having them be mobile and going through a relatively strict structure on what they do academically? Even at a young age, it's pretty consistent from what I have observed in the different Montessori classes I've been in. What's the difference is you have a rich curriculum and then you don't. And so I think that's why we have historical precedents on this, because we have looked at this, we have the guidelines, and then we look at, is there something else that's happening? And for me, I clearly see something else happening.
But there are Montessori schools that my kids participated in that were very outdoor oriented. So I think this is more of a choice than a curriculum.
also, don't forget the downtown daycare got the exemption and they had no outdoor play area at all because they were surrounded by city streets.
And it's still operational?
No, that was the old U-Haul building where the storm cellar currently is. There's a
pre-Goodwill?
daycare there for a few years. The
Okay.
council did grant a waiver. They had an indoor play area because they had no ability to have an outdoor play area. I think the good cause at that time was the availability of daycare in the downtown center that would be easily accessible to workers downtown.
Mr. Mayor, I'm leaning towards Julia's interpretation on this because like curriculum is not defined anywhere in the state code that we spent months and months and months workshopping with other providers in the area. And I don't know that I want to, the phrasing was, we can issue if there's finding of good cause for the issuance of such license. And we have a shortage of providers in the area without a doubt. And it's not, you don't do it to make a lot of money, and because the people who get into early child education do it out of the kindness of their hearts. I am nervous though what precedent it sets. The decision that was made when the old U-Haul building and the Main Street thing was a different council and different circumstances, and I would also estimate that the trends of at-home providers looked different than it does right now. I'm still gravitating towards treating this conversation like it's a license about a daycare and our expectation of having outdoor space available to kids regardless of how long they're there or what curriculum they're consuming when they are under supervised care.
Do you see any difference by the fact that it's only 3 hours that the kids are there versus, most daycare centers for young kids are providing daycare for young kids for the entire day so the parents can work? Do you see a difference there at all? And does it kind of lean you
No, because
somewhat outside of daycare and more into education?
I'm thinking in terms of like what we do for like half day kindergarten and preschool, right? Like we have those expectations, and the age is slightly different, but I don't think a 3-year-old to a 4-year-old or 5-year-old, like the space needs look that different. If you're talking about half day care, but I'm also torn because if there's a conversation within Jubilee to fix this in the next few years, it's a goofy building to try and find an outdoor space to make it happen. But I am hopeful that a landlord will want to work with them on it. But I don't know what good it is to approve it now and say, we really want to see a playground and then have them come back into compliance, because as soon as we approve without a waiver, what's the incentive to bring it back into compliance?
This might be a question for you. So I'm not even quite sure how to phrase it, so I'll just do my best on here. So let's say that the council decides that, nope, you have to have outdoor play area. Then really you just say, okay, we have to have outdoor play area, and you get someone to check it off a list, but you still don't use it. Or are you going to actually have to move?
Good question.
All right, so I can.
Yeah, sure. So in my mind, it looks like if the council decides that, no, we don't want to grant a waiver, because we have worked so hard, and I'm not poo-pooing that at all. It's a diligent process. So if we're like, nope, sorry, we're still going to require you to have this outdoor play area. Well, it seems like it wouldn't be very hard to be like, well, they said we could use their spot, and so we now have outdoor play area. I mean, but
So
you're still not going to use it. I mean, and I understand that, but how hard is it just to be like, okay, we're going to try and find something semi-adjacent or adjacent?
okay, I'll try and answer that. So I think we would like to build a playground adjacent, and we have the space to do it. We just don't have the money yet. So that is we have, I have one quote on a playground, and I have another person looking at it right now. But realistically, I mean, I think the first quote was $68,000. So
Yeah.
Sure.
it's going to be quite a fundraising feat.
Follow up on it.
So just so you know that is something that we want, but again, the 3 and 4-year-olds would not use it.
Right. No, I'm trying to help you get past that,
Yeah,
quite
okay.
honestly. What I'm looking at is there's a spot where there can be an outdoor area.
Yes.
So you could say we can take kiddos out there and we can play tag and we can
Yes.
run around. And so the outdoor area is there. We're not saying that you have to use it. We're just saying
Yes.
it's there.
Yes, we do have one. Yes. That is available to us if we need to use it.
Okay. Thank you.
If it's considered an outdoor area right now, why are we here if in fact someone at the city found it to be not adjacent to the building?
I guess it isn't technically our play area. It's already been granted to another program. They have been kind enough to let us use it when they aren't using it. Maybe that might be why. And also just because we wanted to have our own license and have you say, yes, we recognize. And I didn't really mean to bring up curriculum. That isn't like what I was talking about. It's just the idea that one of the principles in Montessori is an uninterrupted work time and a 3-hour uninterrupted work time. So if the 3 and 4-year-olds are only there for that 3.5 hours and we want to uphold that principle, they're just not going to end up going outside. And it's also, the idea is because it isn't childcare, parents aren't paying us to have them there and just playing on the playground. They can go home after their naps and play at home outside in their yard. They have the whole afternoon ahead of them. So I don't know if that helps at all, but I didn't mean to bring up things about curriculum. It's not really about that. It was more about the uninterrupted work period.
Thanks.
Okay.
Your Honor,
Yes.
I think if I might clarify, I think the rear play area is considered to be adjacent to the school.
Mhm.
The front play area, this being used by, I think is Thrive is the other daycare facility in the Real Life Church. They're using the front one. They actually had to get an appeal from the council because it wasn't adjacent. And they had to cross the parking lot travel lanes to reach it. And they talked about how they would be making that maneuver. But the site that I think they have to be able to use in the rear would be adjacent.
Once they create it as a playground.
Right.
Correct. And we don't have any standard for what the playground contains. It does have to be fenced, but it doesn't have to have anything else there. It's just an outdoor area underneath the city code. We don't define that it has to have play structures or equipment.
So, Mr. Mayor, I've got one more question for clarification.
That's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So Jubilee School
Yes.
is operational and is using this back area behind East Side to meet that whatever, I don't know if their school, that's probably state led, right? So,
Yeah, we don't have a requirement for outdoor play areas for schools. This is a daycare unique
And-
requirement.
and so
They have to
because,
become a daycare.
and so now that the age group is expanding for coverage and it falls under the daycare definition,
That creates
are
the
here.
requirement, yes.
That's why we're here.
But then they have it.
but they have it.
So that,
That's
I'm
what I'm
a little-
confused.
They
If it's
just
under the
decided
same
to put.
umbrella.
So Cody, I mean, they
Absent
just put a fence around
Absent the
that
fence.
block there.
Absent the
But that-
fence.
If they put a fence around there, that would become an adjacent property,
Correct.
a playground or whatever you call it. So can you put a fence around that property before you put kids in there?
Well, it has to be a permanent fence. It can't be just like an easy thing to put up. So that's why we're looking at putting in the actual playground with the actual fence. But
And that area is the next to the loading docks for Safeway, right? That's
It's right past it. Yep. But it's in like, I don't know if you can tell from that picture, but it's like in an enclosed, like two of the walls of the playground would be walls of buildings, and then there'd be a fence on two other sides. So
I would suggest that we don't approve this, and that you work with the city to fix the issue and come back.
Work
Or
with
not
the
come
city.
back. To put in a fence or whatever it is that you need to do so that you meet the requirements, because it doesn't sound like it's too onerous to me.
Was it 68,000, just to follow up on that, was it $68,000 to put in a permanent fence?
I'd have to look at what the specifications were. It was for the fence, it was for bark, it was for a play structure, and it was for all the preparation of the ground to put in an actual fence, because it's a paved area right now, so.
And East Side's amenable to doing whatever, like, as far as I know it's tricky since you don't own the building.
Correct.
They're amenable to whatever you need to do to get it.
I've been told that, yes, a playground is possible.
Okay. Yeah, I'm less, if the school is using the space in the back, I don't know why that wouldn't satisfy without an emphasis on the fence. Why I wouldn't be happy to see the daycare receive the permit, but can we place a condition that we can't grant the conditional use permit comes after, right? This order of operations is scrambling in my brain. I'm sorry. Okay.
So I guess I'm following up on hers, and what is the procedure if you want to grant it, but you want to make sure that that placed area is fenced in, then what's the order on which that happens?
Right. So then you would deny the appeal, and the applicant would be required to comply with city code and provide the fenced-in play area. Then once they secure, once they're able to obtain the license, they would then apply for the conditional use permit. So if they're not going to be able to meet the city's basic licensure requirements, we bring this to the council first before we go through noticing adjacent property owners and going through the land use proceeding. So if you wish to have them continue fence in the play area, meet the city's daycare requirements, then you would deny the appeal. And the applicant then would be required to comply with the city's requirements and to fence that area in if they wish to operate the school as they have described.
So Bill, I don't have the code right here in front of me. Does the code provide that it has to be a permanent fence?
So the play area in the city code just says open space for outdoor play, minimum 100 square feet per child is required. This area shall be adjacent to daycare facility, shall provide for safe play area that can be easily maintained, is accessible for use by children. The fencing requirement comes in underneath the zoning code. So you have to have the outdoor play area, then the zoning code does require the fencing.
And it'd be permanent fencing.
I believe that's how it reads. I have to look it up real quick.
Yeah, what I want to do is not make it so onerous that, you could put up a fence that kept the kids in for a while they actually get money, gets it $68,000.
I'm going to use it, but
But the 5 and 6 year olds could.
yeah, before it's a playground though, it won't be very exciting. Well, anyway.
I've got two final thoughts, Mr. Mayor, if that's okay.
Yes.
I'm trying to look at this from perspective of someone who would really desperate, if I had a kid who needed to get and was eager to have the opportunity for Montessori, because I think White Pine was our last white Montessori school in town and they're not around anymore. So with that in mind, and from trying to advocate from a business perspective, if this is reviewed, if all of these permits are reviewed for compliance every year, and now that we've been able to have this conversation and there's some clarity from Jubilee on what's needed to be fully brought in compliance with code as written, would this be then reviewed next year? And if there's no fence, would we be having this exact same conversation?
So if the council wish to grant the appeal with a condition that they install the fencing for the outdoor play area or provide the outdoor play area within 1 year of the date of the approval of the appeal, then that would come up with the renewal of the license 1 year from now.
Okay, thank you.
And if I might, from the zoning code, it says child care facility shall provide a contained or fenced outdoor play area sufficient to comply with the spatial standards required by city code. Site-proof fencing or site-proof landscaping shall provide on perimeters of such outdoor play areas where necessary to protect the privacy of neighbors' yards. The site proofing probably wouldn't be necessary here because there are no adjacent residential uses, but it would have to be contained.
Okay, thank you.
Could you get a fence up in a year?
I don't know, but if that's the requirement, I would certainly try because I want the program to succeed. So
I just can't help but say I'm an advocate for our daycare rules. I worked really hard on that as well, and wanted it to be done in the right way. And we had folks go back and rework this. I understand all of that. I think, however, it's just really important to also sometimes look at the individual's need and what they're doing and what they're providing. I know that what the Montessori school is providing is good. I know that what they're doing helps our children. I don't see in this one instance, and I think sometimes as a council, we are allowed to look at the one instance. We have historical precedent for that, in fact, on this very issue. I think this is one of the few times we are able to say, wow, this is the one time it doesn't work, and it makes sense that it doesn't work because what your school is doing works. And I understand, oh, well, let's just have them put a fence in. Okay, I'm with you. If we have to, you figure out how to do that. But that makes it really hard at this one time, and we're doing good things. And I think with the overall issue of our daycare rules and fight and advocacy for it was to help do good things for the children, and they're doing good things for our children. And I know that that won't always be the case for other things, right? And that's why we do look at these appeals and we look at what they're doing. I think what you're doing is good. I am all for helping you get by in this one instance. And I'm not out there for all of the time. Any other time I've had 99 other cases, it'll be like, nope, if you're a daycare, you have to do this. This is a one time where I really, truly feel for the great things that it does for our kids that we don't have to do it this time.
Okay,
So I take that as meaning that you don't think they need to have to put a fence in a year?
I don't.
Okay. Just want to translate that for everybody.
Thank you.
okay, folks, we're kind of at a nexus. Everybody's bounced up and down the podium.
Mr. Mayor, I would make a motion that Bill said, copy paste what Bill said. My motion would be to approve with the condition,
That
But
in
you-
1 year, the facility meet the requirements
the requirement.
associated with the daycare.
That's the one.
So then you have a year with kids with no fence.
But
It
they
sounds
would
like for
be using it.
10 students, head count. Okay, 10 students. And if they aren't using it,
So we have a motion dangling.
Let me just comment on that. We don't have to really worry about the older kids because they're not under those rules of daycare, right? It's the
Yes.
little goobers.
They're under school regs, not daycare regs. So we've got a motion. Is there going to be a second?
Second,
Okay, just before I uttered the words. So we got a motion and a second. For the vote, Haley,
aye.
Drew,
I disagree.
and nay. Gina,
No.
nay. Sandra,
No.
Maureen,
yes.
Julia.
No.
Okay, that motion goes down.
My first one. Do I get like a badge or something for my first failed motion?
So,
Cool. Girl Scout badge.
so that motion dies. We are still in search of a resolution.
I move that we uphold the denial of the license.
No second.
You didn't ask for a second.
Usually I don't. Is there a second?
Can I ask a question?
Yes?
Is the intention with denying as written, upholding the denial, to just leave it up to Jubilee to, if they want to come back, to do it on their own?
Yep.
Okay.
To uphold our
Code as written?
code. Yep.
Second.
Okay, that's moved and seconded to deny the appeal.
Slowest second.
So Haley,
Aye.
Julia,
Aye.
Sandra,
No.
Gina,
Aye.
Maureen,
No.
and Drew.
No.
Okay, that one goes down 2. Or rather, that's a 3-3. What do we do about a 3-3?
You break this out, Your Honor. Was that 3?
That's your job.
You vote.
So Mayor votes no. And we're still left looking for another motion.
Julia, I'll get you a badge too.
Thank you.
I already have one.
Oh,
I might be getting a badge here in a moment. I make a motion. I didn't spend a lot of time preparing what was done by a lot of the work of fellow council members. I recognize there's a lot of work done. I recognize I'm new to the council. That being said, what other council members have said, that we can read through these things and we can read between the lines. There's a need, and making stringent requirements, sometimes I think we can see past that. At least I can see past that. So I'm going to botch my first motion. So
Before you make it, just so for staff, if you could on the record articulate what the good faith reason is. If you wish to grant the appeal, then it would be to grant the appeal and direct the city clerk to issue the license, and that you're granting the waiver from the outdoor play area for a good faith reason, whatever it is that is the basis of the decision.
okay.
no added pressure, Drew. It's okay.
So you
Welcome to the council.
move finding a good cause to direct the city clerk.
Okay, I would move finding a good cause to direct the city clerk in issuing the daycare facility license to Jubilee Montessori School, or taking other action such.
That's,
Yeah, I don't need to read that. Yep.
Yeah,
So,
I did the same
Drew,
thing.
can I maybe help you out a little bit on
Yes,
that
yeah,
one?
please, maybe you should do this.
And I
Yeah.
may well also botch it, but I move that we grant the appeal in the good faith effort and allow Montessori Jubilee to continue as they are. And hold on, the whole glasses thing is coming back to haunt me again, folks, sorry. So I move to uphold the appeal. Is that correct, Bill? Is that the right way to?
I thought you
So you are granting the
I'm wanting
appeal.
them to be able to.
You're granting the appeal and you're directing the city clerk to issue the license.
I
For,
move that we grant the appeal and allow the city clerk to issue the license under the good faith practices,
finding of good cause.
finding of good cause
It'd be helpful if you'd articulate the cause.
of not having to operate under the daycare rules of having to put a fence on the adjacent playground area.
It'd be helpful maybe if you articulated what was unique in this case,
let me
the
help
curriculum or
Sure.
the
This
operation
is a
of the
whole
school.
team effort.
So you really have to look at this in the eyes of,
Yeah.
you're facing
So-
another appeal from the
Based on that.
same standard. What differentiates this case, that you're not requiring the outdoor play area that you would require of any other daycare facility. So I'd like to have that good cause on record so that we have that as a basis in the future, that should you find yourself in the same position, they don't look at this as precedence for you to grant a waiver of outdoor play area. So you need to, staff would request that you would identify what is that good cause that you find in this case.
Okay, got my finger on the trigger. The good faith reason being that the children who would be in the daycare part of this aren't going to be expected to utilize the adjacent outdoor play area. They're only there for 3.5 hours a day, period.
And part of a Montessori school.
And it's part of the school.
So due to the unique operating characteristics of the Montessori school, you do not feel the outdoor play area is necessary.
Amen. You say yes.
That's what I was gonna say, Bill.
Hold
I
on.
just want to capture that there's something unique in this case. You're granting this waiver.
Definitely.
Yep.
That was the unique feature I just highlighted. Thank you very much.
Lori, do
There
you want to
go.
read our motion to us?
Which of the four?
so who
Try it one
actually
more time.
wound up
Okay,
making the
the
motion?
motion
One more
is
time.
that we are upholding the appeal.
Granting the
We
appeal.
are
and
Granting the appeal and
directing-
telling the city clerk, instructing the city clerk to issue the license because of the unique operating features of this,
Requirements of the Montessori school.
requirements of the Montessori school. How's that?
That sounds good.
Okay, we got a
Second.
motion
Second.
and a second.
Drew got this idea.
Okay,
Wow.
here we go again. Sandra,
Aye.
ooh, Julia,
No.
Haley,
No.
Maureen,
Yes.
Gina,
Yes.
and Drew.
Yes.
Okay, we have a successful motion and pertinent to the well-articulated motion, the license will be issued due to the interesting characteristics of a Montessori curriculum. So there we go. Cool. Okay, next up is the consideration of the Moscow Area Mountain Bike Association license agreement for the Moscow Mountain Property Trail Proposal. David Schott.
Hi, David.
Good evening, Mayor
Good
Betke,
evening.
members of council. Thank you for having me tonight. So again, this is the consideration of the Moscow Area Mountain Bike Association license agreement for the Moscow Mountain Property Trail Proposal. I'm going to use the term MAMBA rather than that long name throughout this presentation. So a little bit of an introduction. MAMBA has reached out to the city of Moscow with a trail proposal for the Moscow Mountain property. The proposal includes the construction of a trail system on the property that connects with existing trails in the surrounding area. A little bit of background, the Moscow Mountain property is located on the top of Moscow Mountain, highlighted on the map on the bottom of your screen. A little bit of history: on June 9th, 1941, Harry and Nina Powell donated 20 acres. This was to protect the watershed and recreational purposes to the city of Moscow through a deed of gift. Currently, the property is undeveloped and not managed for recreational purposes, and we don't have any plans for it in the future. Some of the trail proposal highlights, a little bit about MAMBA, a local nonprofit organization founded in 1997, which develops, maintains, and promotes the use of over 60 miles of trails on and around the Moscow Mountain area. These high-quality proposed trails will connect into existing trails with similar uses, purpose-built for mountain biking and running to that community within our area to increase recreational enjoyment. So the proposal includes 2 uphill climbing and 1 downhill specific flow line and 1 downhill specific technical line. I would note that the proposed trails conform to the International Mountain Bicycling Association standard trails, which are more sustainable, more enjoyable, to use naturally occurring features to highlight the unique topography of this piece of property, which is fairly unique. I was up there earlier later in the fall, and it's quite a piece of property. So the big thing here is MAMBA is committed to the long-term maintenance of the trail. Just a little bit about the specific trails, and I would note that this is kind of a 30,000 kind of foot plan for the trail system. This may change once we get out and start flagging trails, but just kind of high level concept here. So the red trail will be purpose-built as an uphill climbing route, minimizing technical features and making the climb as sustainable as possible. We're looking at about 3/4 of a mile length on that. The blue trail will be a purpose-built flow trail that takes advantage of the natural features of the topography. It will highlight a feeling of flow that runners and bikers get while smooth, continuous trail, about a half mile on this trail. The yellow trail will be purpose-built as a technical trail that takes advantage of the steeper slope. It's on the south side of the property. The trail will use natural occurring features to create both challenge and slower descending speeds, looking at about a half mile there. And finally, the purple trail will be an uphill trail from Nemesis and an existing trail and join up to the red trail near the top of the property. Where all those trails intersect, there's quite a beautiful vista there as well. So nice little saddle. In total, we're looking at about 2 miles of proposed trails for the 20-acre property. Some of the outcomes we foresee increase the quality and quantity of outdoor recreational opportunities in the area. As the Parks and Facilities Manager, I like to see people out on our parks recreating. So it connects in with existing uses in the area. It utilizes the property for recreational purposes, appeases the desire for advanced mountain biking trails in the area. It creates an asset for us at the City of Moscow. People are going to come use these trails, so that's always good for our community. Promote long-term health and enjoyment of visitors and our residents. So fiscal impacts for this, the preliminary estimate provided by Mamba for the trail construction is $10,000. They intend to apply for a grant that's due here next week, January 27th, to the Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation mountain bike license grant. Mamba has requested financial participation in the cities to show community support for the project in the amount of $5,000. The timeline, we're here at council tonight on January 17th. The grant, as I noted earlier, was January 27th. We'd look at flagging out these trails this spring. The grant decision's made in June of 23, and then construction shortly thereafter, and then looking at 2025 for completion, and I'm sure a great grand opening if approved. So to summarize, I brought this to the Parks and Recreation Commission and the Moscow Pathways Commission. They both recommended approval of the trail proposal by Mamba. The proposal was reviewed by the Administrative Committee last week and recommended approval to the full council. And so our staff recommendation is to approve the license agreement for the proposed trail system on the Moscow Mountain property and financially participate in the amount of $5,000 as matching funds. So with that, I'd be happy to take any comments or answer any questions.
Thank you, Sandra.
Sure. I really appreciate you coming back. I know on the administrative committee, we looked at this and we're pretty excited by it. And a lot of times this is something that would go on consent agenda. And so it wasn't our intent to make you all come back. And I appreciate the folks out there in the audience. We know it's a late night and generally we try not to do this, but this is a really exciting thing. I love the fact that Mamba's able to take care of it. I've had a few people ask me, well, how come we can't do something up there? And my response is, well, I think if you had a proposal and wanted to take care of it and build it and make it, you probably could. They said, oh, they're doing all of that. And so to get the word out about that is really exciting. And that's why I was really in favor of having you come back tonight, because I think this is a great thing. I do think it helps with our tourism, and I do think it helps financially. And it is a beautiful area, except when some wild animals occasionally chase you, but that's few and far between. So thank you for coming back tonight and presenting this.
The two questions that we got clarification on when Sandra came and talked to us at administrative committee for the good of the order. I wanted to make sure that Mamba is in great standing with the other neighbors up there. It sounds like it's been at lumber on all four sides, and sounds like everything's hunky-dory there, which is great to hear. And I wanted to clarify the $5,000 is just the list of materials, because all the labor is in kind, because Mamba has such a
base.
I was gonna say, yeah, like an enthusiastic arsenal of volunteers, and I filtered because I was gonna say kick butt, but not kick butt. So I'll go with enthusiastic arsenal of volunteers. So what Sandra said, thank you all for coming to support the Mamba conversation, and we'll make a motion after Gina says what she wants to say.
No, it's okay. Maybe I'll
Oh, okay.
second your motion.
I move that we approve the license agreement for the proposed trail system on the Moscow Mountain property and financially participate in the amount of $5,000 as matching funds for the Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation grant.
I will second this, but then I want to say something too.
Okay, seconded. Now we have discussion.
Okay.
Go.
To me, just listening to the presentation and asking the questions, I was part of the administrative committee. You guys are a daunting group of organized volunteers, which organized and volunteers doesn't always go together in my experience. And I think that I was hesitant in the beginning because I don't like to sign up for something that costs us any money with a volunteer group of people. But I tell you what, the reputation you guys have precedes you. And I really think this is a ridiculous no-brainer. We should do this and do it and do it and do it. So.
Any comments from this side? Discussion.
I couldn't agree more.
Articulate. Okay, Julia,
Aye.
Maureen,
Aye.
Sandra,
Aye.
Drew,
Aye.
Haley,
Aye.
Gina.
Aye.
Okay, that passes. Congratulations. Apply for the grant, Mamba. Go send it in.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is the Lola Clyde Park Land Water Conservation Fund grant request, starring Alyssa Anderson, David Schott, and Nate Sir.
Everybody's gonna leave. So he knows how to leave.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Do we need to do a? Tonight before you, we have a request to submit a grant application to the Land Water Conservation Fund. And just a little bit about that program. The congressional intent of the Land Water Conservation Fund is to acquire, develop, and maintain outstanding property in perpetuity for outdoor recreation purposes. The Federal Land and Water Conservation Act was approved in 1964, and it basically provided for funding to the states, and the states are required to have a statewide planning document, which is the SCORP, in order to receive their funding. And the SCORP is somewhat like a comprehensive plan, or, you know, it outlines the requirements, priorities, preferences, and guidelines. The Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation manages the land water conservation program for the state of Idaho, and also develops and prepares the SCORP. And every other year, the Idaho Department of Parks and Rec allows the Land Water Conservation Fund to be available to political subdivisions like the cities, counties, and other nonprofit organizations. So we are able to apply this year. Eligible projects must address things that are outlined in the SCORP as priorities. The activities that we're proposing in this grant application, which include park development which include parking, frontage improvements, restrooms, playground, and walking, jogging, paved path system, are ranked within the higher priorities. Just a tidbit here. The recreation activity that was the most popular in the SCORP was pickleball. Just thought I would share that. City staff has looked at submitting this application under this program for several years. However, we've needed to wait until we had the match funding to do that. And accumulating the match for the improvements to both rodeo and polk has taken a while for us to put together. We have been talking to the staff from Parks and Rec for a long time, pulling together the documentation. So we feel that we have a very good chance to be approved for this. Also part of the land water conservation requirements is that you do a great deal of public outreach regarding this, and we have documentation dating back to when the conceptual design of the park was done and all of those meetings. And then we've also been to several council meetings or commission meetings in the last 3 months, and we were in front of Public Works Finance, and we're in front of you here tonight. The grant application is due January 27th. It requires a minimum match of 50% of the total project costs. However, we're able to also use in-kind contributions, and Nate will show you the budget that has that outlined, but that does include administration, engineering, construction management, and these projects are also subject to Davis-Bacon monitoring. So the administration of that program is also included. If we are approved through the Idaho Department of Parks and Rec, we'll be moved forward to do a state presentation in front of the State Land Water Conservation Advisory Board on the dates they've given us is either February 28th or March 1st. At that level, the funding request would then go to the National Parks. Announcements for that program would be late in 23. However, then we would not see an agreement until mid 24 And then we're allowed to have 2 project seasons to complete the project, which aligns very well with our capital improvement plan and the allocations that we have there. So Nate's going to go ahead and go over the construction elements of the project for you.
Hello, Nate.
Hello, thank you. Hello, Mr. Mayor, council members. So I'm here to talk about the proposed construction. Obviously, being a grant at this level, these are all very theoretical. So we've got a lot more quantities than we have, elevations kind of thing. So to go over the overview of the project, this proposes improvements both on the Polk Street and the Rodeo Drive side. And those improvements would include curb and gutter, sidewalks or pathways, pedestrian ramps, and parking on both of those frontages. Additionally, it would construct an interior walking, jogging pathway that would be ADA accessible. So looking at the present day, you can see here, there's not much going on this frontage. We've got a nice green park behind it, beautiful wetlands, and some gravel and some parking bumpers next to a porta potty. So we're hoping to change that look very quickly or within the next few years. Here on Rodeo Drive, we have a similar cross section. We've got, this road is actually asphalt grindings. So it's not a full asphalt section, but it can be, it's scheduled to be replaced with a full asphalt section. So we had gone through some public outreach and several architects' concept drawings made up for this park. And this was selected as the most popular. Obviously, there's a lot here. It looks very pretty, very full, and there's a lot of things going on. So far, that's what we've got. So we've got a little ways to go. You can see from that concept drawing, this park is going to be an amazing amenity for this area, this part of town. So let's go into a little bit of the details here. This is just the costing overview of design that I had. Here, we've got an in and out parking lot on Polk Street. And this, on Polk Street, we proposed a 10-foot pathway to meander behind the area. And on the Rodeo Drive, we proposed a sidewalk that will connect into the PCEI pathways. These are just sort of a diagrammatic view of where the parking spaces will be. That will need to be fleshed out a little more as this design completes. So going over the cost estimate, the 2 things we have to consider, as Elisa mentioned, we have to match what the Idaho Parks is providing either in cash or in-kind work. And that, in our case, we're estimating the engineering design and the construction inspection to be about 35% of the value. So that's where we get that number. And the second thing we have to look at is we can't become cash poor, because we need a total, even if we have lots of in-kind dollars, my work doesn't buy a catch basin. So we need to also have the cash. And so that's what we're balancing here with this grant request. And based on our capital contribution available of $750,000, we would be able to submit a $750,000 grant request. And that would cover the project estimated costs of about $1.2 million. So.
Could you,
yes,
back to the map and the internal path.
Yep. Right here?
Yep. You didn't discuss that one, so.
Oh, thank you. So the internal path is a 1,400-foot path that will connect. As you can see here, it kind of goes over what we have. So we'd have to modify that a little bit. But this will provide access and currently will not connect into the PCEI trail system. There's an additional path scheduled to go outside of here that will be soft surface and will connect into the PCEI system. So this is just essentially kind of the spine of the whole park. It provides access to any area for, any user. Thank you.
Could you go back to the budget for me,
Yes.
please? So I think maybe I misunderstood or I misheard. So we're doing in kind of 350,000. So and the capital contribution would be approximately 450.
Correct.
Okay, that's where we get the seven. I heard cash of 750 and it freaked me out a little bit because that's not what I was reading.
No.
So okay, I get you.
Our capital contribution plus our in-kind match have to be over that 750.
I think we're there.
We're there.
Yeah. Okay, excellent.
Sandra?
Can you go back to the pathway part?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. My only question, and I like this, I'm excited, but how long in your estimate would it take to get that parking area in? And is it going to shut down that road for any significant amount of time?
This is proposed to be a half-street paving, so it would hinder access, but we'd still be able to keep the south side of the road open. And what we'd likely try to do is shut it down during construction hours so we don't have people zipping back and forth, and then just provide some sort of regular path through there.
So anyone that's doing school or programming or events at PCI may be really limited on being able to drive to their parking lot.
Yeah, we would need to be in good communication with PCEI to ensure that we know what kind of vehicles are coming in and out. I mean, we're going to have a 12-foot section, which is typically you're allowed to leave that uncontrolled. But for a series of buses, it might be difficult or it might be confusing.
Okay.
So we'll have to make sure we do a lot of good outreach there.
Thank you.
Are you going to put pickleball courts in?
Not with this phase.
Good answer.
I did just want to add one thing. This fall, we will also be submitting in September a grant application to the Idaho Department of Commerce for a restroom, just like the one that we have at that will be in putting up at Indian Hills Park that is currently parked at the city shop. So the restroom would actually end up going in before these improvements do. Okay, thank you.
Sandra?
Okay, the weird glasses. I move that we approve the submittal of the grant request for Lola Clyde Park, the Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation under the Land and Water Conservation Fund in an amount not to exceed $750,000 in federal grant funds.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Sandra and Maureen. Any further discussion? Okay, Julia,
Aye.
Maureen,
Aye.
Sandra,
Aye.
Drew,
Aye.
Haley,
Aye.
and Gina.
Aye.
And that one propose away. Go for the grants, get them.
Thanks, Elisa. Thanks.
Great,
Nate.
thank you. And last item on the agenda is a sanitation report by Tim Davis and Tyler Palmer, mostly Tyler Palmer, it looks like.
Keep it clean now, Tyler.
And I want to emphasize this is a report, so this is for a listening session relative to the sanitation. And no input or anything, we're just receiving updates essentially.
But
Go
we can
for it,
ask
Tyler.
questions.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Your Honor, Counsel, happy to be here tonight. I apologize on behalf of Tim Davis. He was really looking forward to being here, but Tim unfortunately has caught the flu that's been making the rounds, and so he didn't want to be here, and I don't think any of us wanted him to be here either in that condition. So I'll be doing my best to step in for Tim for his portions of this presentation. As I mentioned, this is a report on the sanitation utility, which is something that we do come and give periodic reports to the council on all the different city operations that we have. A lot of the things that fall into my group are the things that maybe aren't as splashy as building awesome mountain bike trails and some of that fun stuff, but it's critical stuff. You know, it was funny as we got into the early days of the pandemic and we started to think about what services we need to keep providing and that the garbage get picked up, you suddenly realize how important all that stuff is. And so this is one of those kind of banal but very important things that we're going to talk about today, which is our sanitation utility. So the sanitation utility is a little bit unique among city utilities in that it is the lone city utility that we provide by contract. So the operations are contracted out to private contractors. And so the city does primarily contract. So that's contrasting to our other franchises like our water utility, our sewer utility, and our newly formed storm utility, which the city performs internally in-house. But like all of those utilities, this is run as an enterprise fund. And so what that means is that we collect fees for a service provided, and those fees need to reflect residents. So we have to be able to go through a process to show that we are being fiscally careful to make sure that our residents are getting the best bang for their buck when it comes to the providing of the service. And so the sanitation utility has, so the city contracts with Lake Tahoe Sanitation Incorporated now as Inland North Waste for solid waste collection, roll-off and compactor services, operation of the solid waste processing facility, composting facility, recycling collection, and operation of the city-owned recycling center. Now, I say city-owned recycling center because by contrast, the solid waste processing facility, that land is actually owned by Latah Sanitation, doing business in Inland North Waste. So they own that property, but the city's fiscally responsible for the operations that take place on that site. So in addition to solid waste collection services provided at that facility, there's also a transfer station, and the waste that is collected throughout the city is taken to that transfer station, and from that is then transported, and it is transported to a site in Oregon where we haul our waste. And I'll go into a little bit more of the reasons for that as we move through this presentation. The biosolids from our water reclamation facility are also taken out and they are processed on that site. There's also a hazardous household waste facility where the public can drop off unwanted or unused chemicals and pesticides. Our current franchise agreement runs through 2035. And just for some context, in FY22, there were 23,355 tons of municipal solid waste that was shipped, 56 tons of non-municipal solid waste that was landfilled locally, and approximately 4,300 tons of biosolids that were composted, 5,016 tons of yard waste, and 2,826 tons of recyclables were processed. So separately, the city contracts with Finley Butte's Partnership, which is a simple solid waste, as I mentioned, to a landfill located in Boardman, Oregon. And this transport and disposal agreement also has options that run through 2035. So we have long-term stability within the utility, which is a really important thing. Long-term view of these services that need to be provided in perpetuity. It's something that we really need to have stability, both from a rate perspective and a service perspective for our customers. And why we have a landfill here, but we don't just put our municipal solid waste in this landfill. In the early 1990s, there were new federal regulations that were called Subtitle D. And what Subtitle D really did was it changed the game entirely for local landfills. Up to the early 1990s, there were just hundreds and thousands of local landfills. And these local landfills were traditionally handled by just either digging a big trench or digging into the side of a slope, and usually, pretty deep as the topography would allow. And then they'd bury their garbage in, and then they'd cover it with a certain amount of cover, and they'd usually put it in 10 to 12 foot lifts, compact it down, cover it up with about 18 inches of soil, and everybody went on about their merry little way. But when you have all of the contaminants, and as we've seen with many emerging contaminants, this became a big concern nationwide, that we didn't want to have just landfilling then leaching potentially into water supplies and into soils and contaminating the area. And so there were new regulations put into place with Subtitle. The main thing that they required, there was a whole slew of requirements, but the main thing that became very difficult for local landfills was that you had to have a poly liner underneath and then seal it over the top of any garbage. And so anything you were going to landfill had to have that in place, which logistically pretty much became impossible. It would mean that if you wanted to continue to operate your landfill, you would have to go back in all of these cells, dig out all of the garbage, line it, put it back, cap it off. And so from an expense standpoint, it's really not feasible at all. And so what that led to was the formation of larger regional landfills that could meet these requirements. And the siting of these landfills was very specific. For example, most of them in the inland Northwest are located in some of the more arid regions of Oregon, where there's less rain, and it was easier to meet the requirements that were under Subtitle D. And so the city of Moscow, along with Latah County and many other communities all around the country, ended up having to start hauling their waste rather than landfilling it locally. So at that point, because of the complications of that, we ended up serving sort of as a hub here in the city of Moscow for many of the small communities, because as you may imagine, none of them are generating all that much volume. And so when you look at economies of scale, if the city of Beauville goes and tries to get an independent contract for hauling their garbage all the way out to Central Oregon, that becomes a very, very expensive proposition for them. And so on the hauling side of the contract, the city of Moscow was willing to act as the point of coalescence for these smaller entities so that they could achieve the economies of scale necessary to not have it be a real bank buster for them and their budgets. And so the way that it's the way it's formatted is the city of Moscow each of these entities has their own collection contract. So they each maintain their own collection contract, and they can contract with whomever they would like for collection services. But then it's brought to the transfer station, and at that point, it falls under our contract, and we handle those volumes. And so they make payments to the city of Moscow, and we make payments to our contractor, to Finley Buttes, for the hauling of this waste.
So does that mean that the numbers that you were listing earlier for what was going through the transfer station is better understood as a footprint of regional?
The numbers of what we
waste?
haul out include the waste that we're
Got it.
collecting from each of these entities. The city of Elk River, many of you will recall, is a very recent addition.
Right, okay.
That came on very recently. They asked the city if we would be willing to accept theirs.
Cool.
All right. So in the early, let's see, we've covered this, sanitation rate study. So we recently came back through with a rate study. Our most recent rate study was adopted by the council early last year. The council, just as a quick reminder, rate studies, they're generally conducted for our utilities about every 5 years, and it's a way for us to have a third party take a look at what our operations are, what our contracts are, what our financial obligations are, what debt the utility is carrying, and make sure that our rates are in alignment with what it costs to deliver the service. And so the methods that are used to establish the rates for the functions in the sanitation utility are based on principles that are generally accepted, pretty widely followed throughout the industry. And many of the assumptions are based on the contractual agreements that currently exist. And so what's important for the sanitation utility is that contractual agreement is the basis for that rate study. So any significant contractual changes will then have an impact on rate changes, because the rates are based on the contractual agreement. Therefore, if the contractual agreement changes, then the rates need to change, because that's what the rates are based on.
If we do it for 5 years, do we build in that we expect it's going to go up this much?
Mm-hmm. We build in, there's an inflationary component that's built into it. There's, as we've seen with inflation lately, sometimes that's really hard to anticipate, but there is always an inflationary component that is built into the rate studies. And it includes taking a look at what historic CPI has been, and then projecting that out. So the basic framework for evaluating utility revenue needs is found on a set of fiscal principles, and it's largely based on City Resolution number 2011-11. And these policies include things like cash management, capital funding, financial performance, rate proportionality, and they're intended to promote the long-term financial viability for the city's utility. It's just really important, again, that these critical life-sustaining systems have stability. Stability is really what we're going for when it comes to these. And so because of that, there are certain requirements as we fund utilities that we have to have in place. For example, we have to have 90 days of operation and maintenance expenses covered within the utility. So that's cash on hand that we need to have to cover that, so that if something comes up, we have the ability to continue those critical services. And so with the sanitation utility, that equates to about $1.1 million. And then the operating reserve for the solid waste processing facility is another $300,000. You got about $1.5 million, about $1.5 million just in those reserves that are necessary to keep on hand. And then you have the capital reserve budget. And just like in our water and sewer utilities, we have capital budget, and the capital budget is intended to do development of infrastructure that we need for capital expansion. And so that could be for things like if we need to build a new recycling center, if we need any other significant infrastructure for that utility. As we analyzed the capital expenditure, many of you may recall from the discussions that we had about the sanitation utility rate study that the council passed last spring. We have a capital accumulation that was intended for either a rebuilding or re-siting of the recycling center. Because of the impacts of China's sword and the crashing and kind of instability in the recycling missions. And so we suspended those decisions. The need is still there. There's still a need to take a look at what we do there, but we decided that we didn't have a stable enough environment to feel comfortable recommending a large capital expenditure out of this budget. And so for that reason, we suspended any decision on that. And so we also suspended accumulations into the capital budget for sanitation. And so in the current rate study, there are no additional accumulations going into a capital budget. Generally, typically, there's been about a $300,000 to $400,000 annual contribution to the capital budget from the sanitation utility, but that is no longer the case under the current rates that we have. They are built to not include that transfer into capital. And we felt comfortable with that because with the accumulation we have, there's enough to move if the opportunity does present itself. But we don't want to just sit on a large capital account if we don't have the solid plan for the expenditure of those funds. In addition to that, we have closure costs. And so closure costs out of the current landfill are a pretty large expense. And so what closure cost means is that as cells are open and closed, there's a minimum, there are minimum requirements that we have to meet for what's called final closure. And so that includes typically 18 inches of cover and then additional 6 inches of topsoil, and then it's got to be vegetated. And those requirements are something that in our franchise agreement, the city is on the hook for those closure costs. So that's something that we have paid out. For example, we paid $172,257 to Latah Sanitation in FY22 for final closure on an asbestos cell, and another $126,000 for partial closure on a non-municipal solid waste landfill cell in FY23. So these are costs that we are starting to incur. Previously, what the franchise agreement calls for is for the city to generate a closure plan and then pay for final closure. That process hadn't been defined. And so in an effort to have a process by which Latah Sanitation wouldn't have to bear the cost of interim closure that they're doing toward final closure in perpetuity until final closure, which could be decades, we came up with a process by which we could assure that the city had the guarantee that work had been done and done in accordance with the standards and documented, because the risk on the city side is we don't want to pay twice for the same thing, and we want to assure that we're getting what we paid for. And so working with Latah Sanitation, we came up with a process by which we can both get what the city needs as far as assurances go, but also not have them financially hanging out there with a lot of work and materials that they put into something they haven't been compensated for. And so that process we had that first kind of test run for that process, and we believe that was a successful process. We're able to track those closure areas through our GIS system. So we have the exact footprint of where it is, and we have the description, and we have the third-party verification of what was put down there so that we can protect the city and know that when it does come time for final closure, we don't have DEQ coming back and saying, oh, nope, you got an additional $30 million worth of work that we think we've already paid for type of situation.
So the little cities that are actually using the same facility, do they increase too, so that they help pay for the closure fees?
So the cost to this, so there are two different costs, Maureen, that could happen to a rural resident. So the transfer costs, so the garbage that is brought in, the municipal solid waste that is brought in, that cost increases on a percentage basis the same way that ours increases based on the CPI. So when our CPI increases go into place, this year was 5.25%, those CPI increases are applied to these contracts, to the rural contracts as well. There are direct fees for somebody who just goes to dump non-municipal solid waste at the landfill facility. And so they pay those directly. So that's something that they're paying directly to Latah Sanitation. And so those rates that they would pay would then cover whatever their activities are there.
I got one other question. And I think I asked this early on, but I want to revisit it. I was really surprised, if I'm remembering the answer correctly, at how long it can take for us to fill a landfill, right? Like you're listing a lot of tonnage because there's a lot that gets transferred to Oregon, but like when's the last time we closed?
So we close cells pretty frequently, but as far as like the capacity of the landfill itself, so that's something that we actually have we've generated the RFP for a closure plan. So it'll be the first actual closure plan generated, and that closure plan will bring in a consultant that specializes in this, and they will look at all the topography, all the available land, and they'll say, okay, here's the most efficient way to fill this in. Here's the paths you should take this fill this in. Here are the cells. And so generally you'll fill up this cell, and eventually you'll end up driving on top of the cell that you filled in order to really efficiently use the space that's available. I don't know if that answers your question, Haley.
Yeah, I just couldn't, because it's not like the cell closure can be, I was conflating that gradual like I'm picturing like a trash compactor. Like I'm picturing that as being fully closing of a landfill, but it's a really long process. The other thing I was going to ask, as we're kind of talking about DEQ coming and my sense is, since DEQ is carrying out what Idaho DEQ models and uses as its guidance is the federal guidance. And my sense is that's actually a really good and manageable set of standards and expectations that does a good job of protecting the environment and our people. Is that a fair statement? Because I feel like DEQ can get some, can catch flack sometimes as being a rulemaking agency, but like I think they do a pretty good job based on what they're tasked with carrying out.
Yeah, I mean, and largely these are federal requirements that the state then, much like with our stormwater utility, it's a federal requirement that then the state has primacy. And so through DEQ, they have to assure that there's enforcement of those guidelines. And they are for things like, we've all heard about PFAS and PFAS concerns. And so that's some of the reasons for some of the evolving regulations that we don't want that seeping down into the aquifer.
Right.
And so there are some of those things where like if there's a product that could be really heavy in PFAS, like some types of couches or mattresses or those sorts of things, those no longer can just be landfilled on site. It's like, okay, let's not have those there.
Sorry, I went big picture. But
PFAS?
thank you.
Man, you can make me say it. Polychloral, like I'll circle back with you, but they're called forever chemicals. It's a certain chain of chemicals that are really broadly used in industry in a lot of like your non-slip or your non-stick or waterproof things, like a jacket that's waterproof or a non-stick pan. It's really all over the place.
Firefighting foam.
And they never
makes
break down.
cardboard straws not get soggy as fast. Like it's a PFAS typically. So like it's just all over the place, and they've been found to have some carcinogenic properties that are concerning. And so it's been a real emerging contaminant.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know we got a lot of acronyms, Julie. I apologize.
You were like, everybody knows what it is.
All these fun acronyms. So this is just some examples of these concepts for the recycling center, public drop-off, some of those things like the yard waste that still are on the table on the books that we do need to enhance, but we do want to bring that forward to the council when we have a little bit more clarity for what we might want to see. And then having a little bit of a capital reserve is always a good thing because this stuff's expensive. It's just expensive stuff. So this just, for example, was scale at the recycling center. The scale at the recycling center broke. And the way that it broke, it was something that was not real easy to fix. And if we fixed it, any repair that we tried to make was going to be good money spent after bad. And so we actually replaced it, but we replaced it with an at-grade scale, which is what you see over here on the right. And so what that'll allow us to do is if we do move the recycling center or want to move the scale within the recycling center, we can reuse this scale instead of having to repurchase a new scale. But just that work that you see right there is an $80,000 project. And that's something that comes up and we've got to be able to move quickly on. This is something when that scale goes down. Luckily, we had some partners here in town that have big scales because of agriculture that would let us borrow a scale for a minute while we hurry and scramble. But that's, that can be a few weeks solution, but that's not a really long time solution. So it's important that we have those funds to be able to keep operations going. So right now, what I'd like to talk about, I'd like to pivot a little bit to some of the challenges that we've seen in the sanitation world over the last little bit and just talk about some of the ways that the city's been working to address something that I think most of us have heard a little bit about. If we haven't heard about it, we've felt the disruptions in the recycling industry. Essentially what it did is it banned the import of recyclables and required a 0.5% contamination rate, which in essence just is a complete ban on recycling. And that nobody's meeting that. A really good contamination rate is 3% is really good. Anything under 10% is a good contamination rate. But this was obviously them just saying we're just not going to take it anymore. And a lot of it was quite honestly just being landfilled there anyway. So we weren't having the impact that we wanted to believe that we were having with that. And so it flooded the domestic recycling markets. And unfortunately, we did not have the internal infrastructure here built up to handle that kind of waste. And so since we'd always just been able to ship it off, we hadn't built up the domestic infrastructure to handle the waste that was being generated here in country because it was always cheaper to ship it across the ocean. So since then, there's been a really big investment in building up our domestic recycling infrastructure. The IIJA, the new infrastructure bill that was passed by the federal government, actually has quite a bit of money toward building up internal recycling infrastructure. And we're starting to see that come online, but there's still a lot of volatility in the recycling markets. And I'll show you that in some charts as we continue talking about this. When the prices originally plummeted, back in 2018, 2019. In response to that, the city worked with Laytoss Sanitation to implement a program. So the way the contract was structured, there was a set price for the processing of the recycling. And so they were paid for collection of the recycling and then a set price for the process of the recycling. And Laytoss Sanitation had negotiated a contract wherein they received all of the commodity values for the recycling. So whatever commodity values they got just went back to Laytoss Sanitation. So the city was approached when these commodity values really dropped off a cliff by Laytoss Sanitation saying, hey, this is the way that we bid this. These prices have really plummeted. And so we're not making as much back on the commodities as we have historically made back. And so this is really hurting the business. And so at that time, the city and Laytoss Sanitation came to an agreement wherein we would establish a 10-year running average on recycling commodities. And anytime it fell below that 10-year running average, the city would make a payment to Laytoss Sanitation for half of whatever that loss amount was. And anytime it was above that 10-year floating average, then Laytoss Sanitation would make a payment back to the city so that we could share in the risk and share in the reward through that process. And so that resulted in a payment of $98,643.84 in 2019, $76,840.18 in 2020, and then a payment from Laytoss Sanitation to the city of $1,651 in 2021. For fiscal year 2022, with the recycling markets having recovered, as you can see here, it would have been the 2021 recycling market prices. There would have been a payment owed to the city of $29,873. Laytoss Sanitation requested that the city suspend that payment in light of some recycling crashes. This is still showing a 2022 average, but the prices in the last few months have actually really cratered again, just because of that volatility in the markets. And so we agreed to suspend that payment until the end of this fiscal year, when we can recalculate, as we're likely to have a payment due to Laytoss Sanitation. So that way we can take what would have been owed to us, balance it against what we would owe to them, and see where that comes out in the wash at the end of that year.
When we make those payments, where are we pulling them? Where is it coming from?
From the sanitation fund.
Okay.
Yep, those are paid out of the sanitation fund. This I have already covered. Oh, got to keep up my slides with my talking. So there was a 2020 contract amendment. There were several things that Laytoss Sanitation had approached the city that were challenging. And so the city worked with them to try and make sure that there was fair compensation for the work that was being conducted. So the city agreed during that process to an additional $40,000 for an extra alley helper route. And so that resulted in $40,000 annually. This is a route just to help through the alleys to make that pickup more efficient. Tires and household hazardous waste disposal costs were outstripping LSI's compensation. They were able to show us in the numbers that what they'd agreed to in the contract to process that for was no longer covering the actual costs of taking care of that. And so the city then agreed to costs of the disposal of those things. And so that resulted in about $20,000 in annual savings to Laytoss Sanitation. And then recovery facility, in doing some research, LSI had discovered this material recovery facility for single stream that they offered no processing fees. But the rates were better. So the city offered to pay the shipping cost. And so the processing savings resulted in about a $31,000 savings to LSI in fiscal year 22. And so that was the 2020 agreement, those updates, where we kind of just went through and tried to review everything that was costing more than what the contract had produced. More recently, we had seen, and then just in the way the franchise agreement is set up to deal with inflation, the CPI was given to LSI. Initially, the agreement for the CPI, which is the inflationary measure in the contract, was 85% of the CPI. some percentage of CPI is pretty common in these types of contracts. Percent was increased to 100%. It had previously been 85%. It was increased to 100%, and that 15% increase was expected to be in lieu of any future fuel relief, that there wouldn't be requests for fuel adjustments because of that additional 15% CPI adjustment. But in June 2022, LSI requested an additional 20.18% in addition to the 5.25% that was due to LSI through the standard CPI increases in the franchise agreement. And so that equates out to 25.43% that they were asking. That was later revised to a 22.85% in addition to the 5.25, so 28.10% was then requested. And then after a couple months, the request was again updated to 12.23% in addition to the 5.25, so a 17.48% increase. The city met with LSI over the course of several months to take a look at the reasons behind this fairly significant increase request beyond the 5.25 that was in the contract, and worked to identify what was driving some of these cost requests.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's been a while since I took economics, but the CPI includes fuel, right?
The CPI has a component for fuel. Yes, Julia.
Okay,
It's a broad index that is supposed to take into account what the impacts of inflation.
So the spikes in fuel will raise the CPI.
Spikes in fuel will raise CPI, spikes in employment costs will raise CPI, and CPI can include those things.
Thank you.
I've got a timeline question too. So it's a 30-year contract usually, right? Remind me when we signed, what year?
2013
extended?
The 2013 franchise agreement
Is the start of the clock for the next 30 years?
goes out to 2035.
And is it, because this is like the second or third go around with LSI as a contractor for this service.
Mm-hmm.
Are these requests common? Is this new in the past couple of years? I mean, COVID or whatever reason, but is this?
These are the largest requests that we've seen.
Okay.
As on a percentage basis.
And in terms of frequency, I guess I don't know if it's normal to kind of, granted, the past few years have been unprecedented for a number of reasons, but is it normal to be seeing 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 requests over 12 months for adjustments within a contract?
Not in my experience.
Okay, thank you.
So we broke down and looked at the ways that we could take a look at some of this. Fuel did reach unprecedented levels. It was really high, and we want to always look at things through the lens of trying to provide the best service for the best price for our ratepayers, but it also does us no good if our contractors can't stay in business. That it doesn't make any sense, and so it's something that we really try to make sure that we have a fair and equitable approach. And so if there are things that could not have been anticipated or had changed beyond a pace that could have been anticipated when an agreement was put into place, it's not in our interest to not recommend to the council that we not take this super hard line stance of, well, just go ahead and go out of business because, fuel outpaced anything any of us thought it was going to do. And so the city council may recall you recently approved a fuel relief request from Finley Butte's partnership. Finley Butte's had done a calculation based on the amount of fuel that they use in their contract. We looked at what they were proposing. They were just proposing a dollar amount based on what they had seen, their actuals that they had seen, the actual fuel costs that they had put toward our contract versus what it was costing them. What we preferred to do is if we were going to add a fuel component to the contract, we wanted to memorialize it so that this didn't become an every year thing. And one of the things that from the city's perspective is important to do is if we're going to have a fuel provision in the contract, for reasons of equity for our ratepayers, it shouldn't just be extra payments when fuel is expensive. It should also result in some savings to the users when fuel is cheap, because that ultimately means that the service is costing less to provide. And so that's what we put together was just a fuel model that's really commonly used. It really adheres to a lot of industry standards. And so it's a calculation by which when fuel is really expensive, there is a fuel adjustment where we make a payment. When fuel is cheap, then there's a fuel adjustment where the payment that we make goes down proportionately. And this was something that when we ran the numbers through the formula, the numbers that Finley Butte provided us were almost spot on with what this formula cranked out. And so we felt like it was a fair formula that reflected the costs that were being incurred because of the high fuel prices. And so that contract was amended accordingly, and that's gone through council already. And we've already made payment to Finley Buttes for that amount that the council had approved, but declined the offer, instead requesting a little bit over 3% across the contract in perpetuity. We felt that it probably, if there was going to be a fuel adjustment, it was better to tie that just to fuel rather than having a contract-wide adjustment in perpetuity. And so at this point, we thought maybe there was some sort of miscalculation either between the fuel numbers that we'd been provided or with the equation and understanding how the equation works. And so Lake Tahoe Sanitation has committed to setting up an appointment with their accountant so that we can review these with them. Still haven't seen the actual fuel numbers from Lake Tahoe Sanitation, so we can't actually plug it in and run it ourselves, but we're happy to continue this conversation, but work on the fuel thing. But in recognition that fuel prices have been extraordinarily high, especially for diesel. They've come down some now, but 2021 and especially 2022 were pretty rough. Dumpsters, dumpsters was another area that we were approached by Lake Tahoe Sanitation with concerns about the cost for dumpsters. Metal costs have been high. So we've come to an agreement in principle with LSI. And what we've asked them to provide is just the actual dumpster costs. So what they were paying before, what they're paying now, so that we can take the inflationary measure out and then see what's left over. And then we would make a payment. We would recommend to the council that we make a payment in accordance with whatever that amount was, so that we make sure that they're not incurring costs that outstrip what we're paying them back. They shouldn't have to be subsidizing the city of Moscow's dumpsters, and we don't want them to have to do that. So that's something that we've reached an agreement in principle. For roll carts also, we've reached an agreement in principle. Lake Tahoe Sanitation had made a proposal for how to deal with roll carts and the roll cart compensation. As far as there was a small adjustment to a monthly fee that's applied to those. And the city agreed in principle to that. And so we're just waiting to get the information for the roll carts and the rest of these components that we would bring to the council in an update, and we can roll that out. But again, we've come to an agreement in principle on how we can make sure we compensate that. And very similarly, just looking at what roll carts had traditionally cost, looking at what CPI should have been able to cover, and then looking at what's left over and making sure that they remain whole. We ran out of 65-gallon recycling roll carts this past summer, and just recently ran out of 95-gallon. Lake Tahoe Sanitation ran out of these totes. So we've had customers that are signing up here in the city that just haven't been able to get recycling totes. That's something we're in communication with Lake Tahoe Sanitation about, and really trying to make sure that we get those here so that our customers can have services that council has dictated that they want to have provided to the residents of Moscow.
Is there any reason that was given in terms of why we just can't go buy?
We haven't heard yet. They said they're looking into it and that they would be circling back with us with some answers on that, but we haven't heard yet as to.
Do we know what the bill is for all the outstanding, just to pay for all the new roll carts that are needed? Okay.
No. Staffing costs was another area of concern for Lake Tahoe Sanitation. Staff costs, there's certainly been inflation. The really difficult thing with staffing costs is trying to figure out how to, as Councilor Parker indicated, staffing costs are something that are calculated for in the CPI. So how to make that adjustment and determine what is beyond CPI for staffing costs. It's not something as simple as just saying, oh, what was your staff costing before and what it's costing now? Because as a private business, we can't dictate what their salaries are and what salary increases are and how many people are hired and what benefits are provided, those sorts of things. And so that's really something that is a little bit more difficult to calculate. Some of the steps that we have taken to try and help alleviate some of these things is we provided information on how to navigate the new CDL requirements. There were new CDL requirements that were implemented on the federal and state level. This resulted in the city of Moscow. We needed to find an alternative. And so we found a way to become a certifying entity ourselves, and so that we can do in-house training, because otherwise we were looking to it's going to be really expensive to get CDL drivers trained, but we're able to set ourselves up as a training facility fairly easily. And we set up a step-by-step process in a presentation that we put together that we actually provided to all the public works entities in the state of Idaho through the Idaho Public Works professionals. And then we also provided that information to Lake Tahoe Sanitation so that they could become their own training facility as well. So just for contrast to those, I mean, it certainly has been difficult. We've seen a lot of inflation. We've seen increases in construction costs, but our water department, we had a 5% increase this year. Sewer had a 2.5% increase. Storm had a 0% increase. LSI received the 5.5% increase, but as indicated, had requested between 17.48 and 28.10% increases in the past year. And then just as a last note, this is something that we've been working a lot with LSI and internally on. We have some preliminary results from our citizen satisfaction survey, or citizen survey, excuse me, that we conduct every 2 years. So this goes back 20 years. All of the city's utilities had a score that was above the 20-year average, with the exception of garbage collection and recycling. Those were the only two that in the latest survey were below the 20-year average. And so that's an item of concern. It's something that we want to work with and try and identify reasons for that. We've worked with Lake Tahoe Sanitation. In preparation for this presentation, we reached out to Lake Tahoe Sanitation and asked them if there was any information that they want to provide. I forwarded the email that we received from Stevie Steely Johnson, the Chief Administrative Officer for Lake Tahoe Sanitation, to the council. And she cited in that email some of the things that we have worked on together. We've worked on things like improving service to the downtown corridor. There were concerns with pickup times. Our franchise agreement doesn't allow us to dictate pickup times. So we worked with the Downtown Business Alliance and with Lake Tahoe Sanitation to try and come up with a schedule that would work better. Some branch clearing, that we've got a good process now for them to communicate back to us in the streets department to help make sure obstacles are out of the way. But we have seen an unprecedented increase in missed stops this winter with alleys in particular. We've got a communication method set up for them to let us know what alleys they're struggling with so we can get the streets department out quickly. But, conditions really haven't changed proportionally to the number of missed stops. And so we're working with them, and they're doing some internal reviews so that we can try and work out where the obstacles are and how we might resolve those.
You answer your question. That was what you just said is if they don't pick it up, does your staff go out and pick up the trash?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No,
I misunderstood what you were saying.
It'll get set up
then.
for a callback, and so then they'll end up having to go back out. Some of the concerns is you'll end up just with overflowing dumpsters, and then sometimes residents will get an additional fee that gets applied then to the account on top of that.
So Tyler, just a quick question to clarify. In the past, there hasn't been issues with some of these alleyways or anything. They've been pretty.
There's always, when we have alleys can be tricky, and driving a narrow alley in a big truck is not easy, especially as you're trying to maneuver, get over the side, pick up a dumpster. And I think there are a variety of potential concerns. There's an increased awareness of employee safety. And so getting out in slick conditions and wrangling a heavy dumpster and, doing some of those things can definitely, we have seen some shifts in concerns about employee safety that may not have been as acute in the past, but conditions have not been extraordinary, but we have seen a disproportionate number of missed stops this year for sure. And that's something that, and we're working through that, and LSI is committed to reviewing that and trying to figure out what it is that's going on there.
That in your presentation, it said that the city spent an extra $40,000 for alley pickups. I don't, what was that for?
It's a helper route for the alleys. And really Tim Davis would be I can really circle back and provide a lot better specific detail on that, but it's a route that was generated, an extra route that was generated to help with alley pickup specifically.
Okay.
And then, that's the garbage. And then this is the citizen satisfaction survey, or the citizen survey for the recycling. And with that, I would be happy to field any questions that you all might have.
Tyler, one other question I have real quickly is with kind of this graph and with the price increases that have been requested, where does this fit in that timeline? Have they started just coming this year? Has it been the last year?
When we saw the China sword, Drew, in 2018, late 2018, early 2019, so that would have been right in this period. That was when the China sword impacts really happened. And so that was when we started to get pretty frequent requests for compensation adjustments, especially as it pertained to recycling and a few of those other components that I cited, the household hazardous waste, the tires, some of those things. That's where that falls in that timeline. That's really when we saw a more significant uptick.
Okay. But our uses of trash hasn't gone up or anything like that, not significantly.
No, we haven't had a really significant increase in the amount of garbage being processed now.
Okay, thank you.
Historically, there'd been a problem with apartments not being picked up and dumpsters for them. Has that been resolved?
Yeah, there's been some work, there are a couple things with apartments, Maureen, that one is the recycling and trying to make recycling more available to apartments. And each apartment complex is kind of its own beast. We've got a lot better communication with the property management. And so we have worked through a lot of those issues with property management, just making sure that dumpsters are appropriately positioned, that they're not blocked. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
I have a process question. One of the things that it sounds like we're getting feedback is asking for some better clarity about closing the loop. And I don't quite understand what the note from Stevie's referencing, but I just am asking big picture. What's the current flow of what happens? And also, like you mentioned, I keep half starting thoughts. Sorry, guys. Here we are at 9:21. We're hanging in there. I call, my garbage gets missed. And I'm going to call, probably not, I think it's a city number.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to call Tim, who is the city employee who oversees and executes everything needed for our sanitation function.
Mm-hmm.
Tim then calls Lake Tahoe Sanitation and says, you got to call back. And then dispatches them. And so I'm trying to understand it, like what happens from there, or if there is someone who has like an overfull dumpster and stuff, right? You've got a couple of cooks in the kitchen, but like,
I think that Stevie's spot on in her email with there's certainly room for cleaning up the communication processes. There's some software that's used that has some capabilities. The real balancing point is making sure that the city's getting the information that we need to have, because ultimately this is a city program with city customers.
Yeah.
And so making sure that we have some oversight and the ability to make sure that the customer service that our residents are receiving meets the expectations of the council is something that really striking that balancing act. And so we've had some productive meetings with Lake Tahoe Sanitation on that topic. They are working on scheduling some time with folks from the software company that does that oversight so that they can come sit down with the city sanitation staff and the Lake Tahoe Sanitation staff, and we can work out those processes and better understand the capabilities so that we can streamline better that customer experience. And so that's something both sides are very interested in doing, is streamlining that customer experience, but through that process, making sure that the city is getting the information that we need to have for oversight purposes.
Because we do the billing, right? I mean, the billing comes to us. Anyone who signs up for service is going to be a city.
It's a city bill.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a city service that is performed for us by Lake Tahoe Sanitation.
Okay.
So that's, yep.
It's getting less fuzzy after 20 times of asking similar questions. So thank you very much for the distinction.
We'll be back with more to provide complete clarity eventually. Okay, thank you, Tyler.
Thank you, Mayor.
Good
Thank you
report. Okay, just to poll the council, does anyone have any pressing reports, or due to the earliness in the year?
I have one worth calling out. I had my first Human Rights Commission meeting today, and I want to highlight the Human Rights Breakfast at, it used to always be at the
Human Rights Task Force.
Thank you. Is it still the middle school? Okay, middle school in the lunchroom. Fond memories of cheesy sandwiches in that space. 9:30 is admission by donation with a guest speaker, and it should be great. So,
But
If I can add to that, it's limited to 100, and so you actually need to sign up for it, and they've had 67 people sign up
I
so
heard
far.
69. You're right.
So-
So if you're interested, sign up online or
if you're worried about
or call Finn.
the other thing is you can all do is do it by Zoom. They're doing it by Zoom again.
There you go.
Yes,
It's teamwork.
we're getting there.
Okay, in the interest of others, is there a motion to adjourn at this point?
So moved.
Okay, everybody in acclamation? Aye.
All right.
Hi.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Forgot they're doing Zoom.